Picture the room where a company gets sold. The deck is clean, the management team is confident, and on the page that matters most, there's one line: operating margin up 400 basis points over the hold. Everyone in the room reads the number the same way. It's the proof, it's the value you created, it's what the buyer is paying for. I want to ask a question that sounds simple, but isn't. Is that number a fact or a claim? For most of the history of this business, it was a fact, or close enough. You bought a company, you improved it, you sold the improvement. Margin went up because the business got better, and the next owner paid for better business. The model worked so reliably, it stopped being a model. It became instinct. And there was a reason it worked. For a decade, most of the return in a buyout didn't come from the operating line at all. It came from leverage and from multiples rising underneath you. Margin was a supporting factor. Nobody looked too hard at when it improved because the improvement wasn't carrying the deal. That world is gone. Cheap debt is gone. Rising multiples, gone. The math that used to work on 5% of annual earnings growth now needs 10, 12 to reach the same return, which means the one number that used to be a supporting actor is now carrying the deal. So it's worth knowing whether it's real. Here's what happens if you stop looking at the number. You start looking at its shape, how margin actually moved across the years you own the company. You'd expect to climb. Buy it, improve it, steadily sell it higher. A line that's going up and to the right. That's not what the data shows. Across the buyout universe, margins barely move during the hold. In a lot of cases, they drift slightly down. And then in the final 18 months, right before a sale, they jump. Not climb, a sprint. The improvement doesn't accumulate over the years you own the business. It appears concentrated in the quarters right before you sell it. Sit with that. The value creation that justifies the exit tends to show up exactly when the exit is being prepared, and it gets more pronounced, not less. The most recent wave of exits show that the sprint got bigger, more common than it was a decade ago. This is an historical footnote. It's just the book being sold right now. Now, I want to be careful here because there's an honest version of this. Sometimes a late jump is real. A price increase that finally lands, an integration that finishes, a contract that switches on, legitimate, durable, earned. But sometimes margin goes up because you stop spending. You defer the investment, you thin the team, you pull marketing, you hold capex, you make maintenance wait. The margin rises not because the business got better, but because the clock got managed. From the outside, on the page, those two things look the same. And here's the part that experienced people already know how to think about, just not here. We already have a discipline for exactly this problem. We just apply it one line higher on earnings. We call it quality of earnings. Nobody serious takes reported earnings at face value. We ask whether they're real, whether they repeat, whether they survive contact with the next owner. We do all of that for earnings. We don't do any of that for margin, which means the number now carrying the entire return is the one number we never audit for whether it actually transfers. That's the realization worth leaving with. There are two different numbers hiding inside margin improved 400 basis points. There's the margin you achieved, and then there's the margin that transfers to the next owner. We report the first. The buyer only pays for the second. And we spent years treating them as the same number. So who's responsible for the difference? Follow it around the table? The operating team knows when each point of margin actually showed up and what it cost to get there. But that knowledge doesn't have to travel into the exit deck. The deal team controls how the number gets presented, but not how it was built. And every incentive in the room at the moment of sale rewards a clean number, not a footnote about how recently it arrived. Information sits in one place, authority sits in another. Accountability sits nowhere. Not until a buyer's diligence team asks the one question the seller is rarely ready for. Not, how high is the margin? But, when did each point of it arrive and what moved in the opposite direction? The most economically important number in the transaction has no owner. Not because anyone failed, because no one was ever assigned. This is one line on one page in one deal, but it's a pattern, and a pattern's the point. Private equity became an operating business. The returns now depend on what you actually do to a company, but we still measure it, report it, and govern it with the instruments of a financial business instruments that built it for a time when the operating line didn't have to carry the weight. The hard problem isn't creating operational value anymore, it's proving it transfers. And the value that transfers versus the value that just shows up before the sale sits in a gap that nobody at the table has been made to own. So before the next deck goes out, it's worth asking the question the buyer is already going to ask. The number in your exit deck is not a fact, it's a claim, and the buyer is the one who decides whether it's true. That is why I am your go-to for payroll in private equity nationwide. No exceptions, no rivals. My name is Preston Leahy. I would love to talk to you about value creation strategies leveraging your HRIS system. Thanks for watching. See you on the next video.